Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Historic Preservation Commission meeting of Thursday, July 17th, 2014. The time is 5:17. May we have roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Garpetian is absent. Commissioner Morgan?
Here.
Commissioner Shire?
Here.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Here.
Commissioner Vidor?
Here.
Thank you for presence.
Second on the agenda is report regarding posting of the agenda. The agenda for this meeting was posted on or before Monday, July 14th, 2014 on the bulletin board outside of City Hall. Item 3, approval of minutes, March 20th, 2014 and April 17th, 2014. Does anybody have any changes?
Minor correction. On minutes for Thursday, April 17th, page 3, under 8C, paragraph starting, J. Platt announced that May. We have an extra that in there.
The May. Isn't that how you say it?
Not typically.
Okay, we'll get rid of that. Thank you.
That's all I have.
Any others? Okay, I have a small one. I think on the same minutes of April 17th, under item 7A, if I'm not mistaken, I believe Joanna Linkhorst is Director of Friends of Rockhaven and may have been representing herself as such.
That is very true.
That is true.
Okay, we'll make the changes unless there are any others.
That's all I have.
Okay, we'll make those changes and put them in the record.
Okay. We have a motion and a second.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Number 4 is oral communications. Discussion is limited. Oh, not for a minute.
Are we going to roll call?
For minutes, sorry. Roll call,
Sure.
please.
Moved by Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Yes.
Commissioner Vartanian?
Yes.
Thank you. Minutes approved, 4-0.
Thank you. Number 4 is oral communications. Discussion is limited to items not a part of this agenda. Each speaker is limited to 5 minutes. The commission may question the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision. Discussion, I believe it should be. I have 2 cards. The first is from Sean Bursell.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and members of the Commission. I'm Sean Bursell, Executive Director of the Glendale Historical Society, and I'm pleased to announce that the Glendale Historical Society will be holding its inaugural gala and benefit on Saturday, August the 23rd from 7 to 10 p.m., and it's being held at the Brockman Clock Tower Estate, which is, of course, on the Glendale Register, actually twice, once for the clock tower and once for the house most recently. And it's also, of course, within the newly created Brockmont Park Historic District. We're going to have a wonderful evening of great food, live music. There's going to be a silent auction. We're going to give our preservation awards that evening, and as a special treat, tours of the estate, which is not normally open to the public. And so it really is a rare and great opportunity to see this very, very unique property. And people who are interested can buy tickets on our website, and the cost is $125 per person for Historical Society members and $150 per person for all others. And as I say, you can buy tickets on our website, which is www.glendalehistorical.org. And I just wanted to make one other comment that the Glendale Historical Society, we held our annual meeting this past Sunday at the Doctor's House, and Commissioner Vidor came and gave a talk on the most colorful resident of the Doctor's House, Nell Shipman, and it really was a treat. I spoke to Commissioner Vidor beforehand and I said, well, what are you going to say? And she says, I don't know. And then she got up there and held us enthralled for 20 minutes, telling the story of the life of this most unusual character, this actress, director, environmentalist, feminist. What else am I leaving out? She was a multi-faceted character, and it was just a wonderful talk, and everybody enjoyed it. And I hope at some point everybody can hear Commissioner Vidor talk about Nell Shipman. So thank you very much.
Pleasure.
I'm sorry I had to miss that. My next card is from Catherine Yerka.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Yerka, and I'm here also on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. I just wanted to bring to your attention that within the last week, 2 contributing properties within the Rossmoyne Historic District suffered illegal window replacements. The city has been made aware of the problem and I assume is dealing with it as we speak. But we are concerned that contributors within historic districts are at great risk, whether from ignorance or malfeasance. We would very much like the city to make efforts to educate owners about their obligation to historically significant properties. That would deal with the ignorance problem. We would also like to ask all of you please to follow up on a suggestion that Laura Friedman made at the first City Council meeting that dealt with the 1720 Grandview property. She suggested that the city institute some real penalties for illegal work that goes on within historic districts in lieu of the ineffectual slaps on the wrist that are in place now. The doubling of the permit fee makes illegal work seem like a pretty good gamble and not like a daunting risk. And I know this is a problem throughout Glendale. Illegal work is rampant. But if historic district protections are to work, and remember these are not just protections for individual houses, but for neighboring properties and the neighborhood as a whole, adequate steps really must be taken to stop illegal alterations. Thank you.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I could just address those 2 items because
Please.
it's something we're working on currently. In terms of outreach, we recognize the need for better outreach into the historic districts. To that end, the city manager's office, in consultation with planning department, is working on a video that's going to be an on-the-move video for GTV6 that would be in regular rotation, which is a wonderful thing, but that ultimately isn't going to reach everyone that we need to. We've also just begun working on a brochure, kind of what we're picturing now is a kind of a trifold brochure that could be mailed out to every resident, every property in a historic district, and then could be done on an ongoing basis, what we picture being either annual, biannual, something, and often enough to make sure that each property, at least we know we've tried as hard as we can to let people know what it means to own property in a district and what your responsibilities are, as well as how wonderful it is to be in a historic district. So that's our goal in terms of outreach. And then I just wanted to correct something in terms of penalties, because we do charge a double fee through our building, through the Permit Service Center, when work is what we call legalized, meaning it's kind of approved after the fact. But in most cases, for example, if someone puts in windows that we cannot approve, those windows have to come out first, and then we write the permit to allow those windows to be replaced with windows that do meet our standards, and then the fees put in place. So it's not merely a matter of someone changing out their windows and saying, oh yeah, I'll pay the double fee. They often are paying thousands of dollars to replace work that they just had installed. So while there may be credence, and that's a bigger discussion that we can't answer here and probably would have to be addressed at city council level, we do have something in place that makes it definitely a disincentive to do work without permits.
Can you keep us posted on those 2 properties?
Sure.
And thank you for mentioning that. I happen to be familiar with those 2 properties because I live in the neighborhood, and I know that there are 2 homes that were recently sold. This is a bit of a problem, especially in historic districts, as neighbors move in and are not aware of the guidelines. I know the Rossmoyne Mountain Homeowners Association is also working on a package of outreach to new neighbors coming in. I would encourage other homeowners associations or members of districts to do the same. Sometimes it's difficult when people buy a home and start doing a lot of work on it before they move in. And I think that's where we're seeing some of the problems. Perhaps in these cases, the homeowners have not been present very often. But it is a challenge, and I hope that the community or those who are involved and interested, that we do find better ways to communicate with our new neighbors. Thank you. Okay, that was my last card. Next on the agenda is comments from commissioners. Any comments? No comments.
It was a great party on Sunday, and you did very well, Commissioner Vidor. I enjoyed every second of it. I was on the edge of my seat.
Okay. Well, yes, thank you to the Historical Society for, obviously doing an incredible amount of work on behalf of the community to bring the community together around the cause of historic preservation and understanding our city's history. Having previously been involved with the Historical Society, I know how much work things take, and it's just jaw-dropping how much is getting done. So thank you very much for all your efforts on behalf of the citizens of Glendale.
Okay. Number 6 is old business, and having none, we'll move to number 7, which is new business, 1555 Valley View Road. Design review of new construction proposed to replace a contributing structure in the Brockmont Park Historic District, continued from hearing of June 5th, 2014. We'll go to staff or...
Yes, I just to introduce the topic a little bit, members of the commission. As you know, this was a project which was applied for while the historic district application was still in process. So at first it was being processed as being reviewed by a design review board, and after the historic district ordinance was adopted by the city council, within a month or two after, we recognized that the proper review authority was the HPC, which is why it's before you here today. I do want to apologize for all the, kind of uproar and upset that period of confusion caused for people. What you are reviewing today is the demolition of the proposed demolition of the building and the review of the proposed new building. You're reviewing both at once, which is exactly the way the design review board handles its cases when there's demolition and proposed new construction. It's handled in one hearing. It has to be handled in one hearing because part of the findings for approving demolition is an assessment of the merits of the replacement project. So it just can't be separated out. We originally did some analysis, I said, thinking that this would go under the review authority and the standards of the Design Review Board. And now that we've switched it to the Historic Preservation Commission, recognizing that staff has adopted a more neutral stance in the staff report. There's not a recommendation to approve the project or to deny the project, but hopefully we've done a good job of laying out the issues for the commission to consider, after you take testimony from the public, of course. And this is will be an interesting and hopefully very substantial discussion that we will all have today.
And then if I could just add, while this is similar to the Design Review Board consideration of a project, there is one significant difference in terms of the outcome of your decision, where DRB only has 3 potential decisions they can make at a hearing like this. The Historic District Ordinance allows for 4 for the Historic Preservation Commission. And just to lay those out for you so that it's clear, It would be possible for the commission to approve the project outright, to approve the project with conditions, which means you impose conditions on it, but the commission would never see the project again. Staff would make sure the conditions were implemented. The third option would be return for redesign, which would suggest that you thought there was merit to the design, but you had recommendations that were significant enough that you would like to see the project again before making a final decision. And then the fourth option, which is the option DRB does not have, is to deny the project.
Okay, thank you. I think with that, we'll move to the staff report.
Thank you, Chairwoman Watanian and Commissioners, and good evening. As you stated, this item before you is design review case number 1329306, located at 1555 Valley View Road. The applicant is proposing to construct a new two-story, 4,530 square foot single-family residence and a detached three-car garage. Essentially, the applicant is also asking to demolish the existing one-story house and the detached garage. The subject property is located in the R1R floor area ratio District 2 within the historic district overlay zone. The subject site is 15,370 square feet and it is irregular in shape. This is a map of the historic district, Brockmont Park Historic District, and it shows the location of the subject property outlined in red. There are 59 properties within this district, which were built between the late 1920s and the mid-1950s. Most homes within this district are colonial revival or ranch styles. 52 of the 59 homes are contributors to this district. Here is the district again in aerial photograph view. You can see highlighted in yellow is the subject property. The prominent feature there you can see from this slide is the tennis court. Again, the site is developed with a one-story ranch-style house, a detached garage, and the tennis court. And it sits on a through lot. Here's a close-up of the subject property. Here are photos of the subject property are seen from Valley View Road. The home was built in 1954, and it is 2,399 square feet, and it is one of 13 ranch homes within this district. As a side note, 10 of the ranch homes are contributors. And also, as you can see in these photos, this home was built within the period of significance and pretty much largely retains its original character. Here are more photos of the subject properties seen from different angles, and also what you're seeing are temporary frames, which is required for two-story construction in the zone. Here I have two site plans side by side. The site plan on the left shows the existing site plan of the property as we speak, and the proposed site plan on the right is what is being reviewed under this project. The existing site plan shows, again, the house, the detached garage, and a tennis court located at the rear of the property. This is a double frontage lot, so the house faces Valley View Road, and the tennis court is largely close to Arbor Road. The proposed site planning is similar to the existing site plan, with the exception of a larger building footprint. The house still faces Valley View, and there will still be a detached garage, only it will be a three-car garage as required by code based on the size of the house, and the garage will front Arbor Road. There will also be a pool between the garage and the proposed house. essentially the tennis court will be removed. These are elevations of the front and the rear of the proposed residence. It will be designed in the Spanish colonial revival style, 2-story in form, and it is consistent with its immediate neighbor. Both homes on the left and right-hand side are also 2 stories. The first and second floors are significantly modulated, as reflected in these drawings, and the second floor is stepped back. So you have a larger volume on the ground floor and a smaller volume sits on the second floor. For the goal of infill developments within a historic district, the infill development goals of the historic district for roof forms, materials, windows, and doors are met by the proposed design. The design reflects many of the character-defining features of the Spanish colonial revival style, such as the smooth stucco walls, red tile roof, exposed woodwork, and a focal window at the front for the living room. The home is also punctuated with a couple of balconies and a porte-cochere that will be accessible from, actually a carport, a carport accessible from Valley View Road, in addition to the 3-car garage that is accessible from Arbor Road. All windows will be aluminum-clad wood windows with external grid, which is appropriate to the style, and each window opening will have a wood seal and frame. The applicant is proposing a combination of window operations, including hung, awning, and sliding. However, given the chosen style of the building, staff is suggesting that sliding windows should not be used on this project. The roof deck proposed above the carport, as you can see on the right-hand side, top elevation, is close to the adjoining neighbor to the left of it, and also does not allow the carport to read as a traditional porte-cochere. So therefore, it should be eliminated from the design. The project also features 3 chimneys. Staff believe that, again, based on the style of the proposed residence, shaped chimneys should be used, and also the top or flue of the chimney should be treated with decorative elements. These are elevation of the proposed garage facing Arbor Drive, or Arbor Road, Here's the material board showing 1-tile roof and the aluminum-clad windows, as well as some of the other design features that will be included in the project. All of these materials are high quality. And that pretty much concludes my presentation. However, for the record, I'd like to add that staff received additional comments that were not included in the packet sent to the board, sent to the commissioners. These comments were received this week between July 15th and 17th, so they were made available for you. And also, staff is providing the commissioner a supplemental CEQA analysis on presumptive and discretionary historic resource, which was placed in front of you. And the city attorneys are here to answer any questions you may have on that matter. Thank you.
Okay. Sorry. Jay, you didn't have anything to add, right?
No.
We're done with the report. Okay. So with that, we'll open the public hearing. And the first speaker will be the applicant, Efrain Oliveras.
Good afternoon, commissioners. Actually, I would like to defer to the owners I would like them to introduce themselves and say a couple of words, and then I'll follow up with the more technical information. Okay.
Sure.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairwoman and Commissioners. I'm Christina Kaminsky-Yepes and my husband Eric Yepes.
Good afternoon.
And we want to thank you all for the time this afternoon and also for coming out to see our property and see the plans and speak with our architect to be able to get an understanding of how we got here and why we're here. I think it's really important to share with the Commission that this process has been going on for a little over 2 years for us, actually going on 3 years now, where we started in 2011 with a different architect. And the original intent was to be able to add on to the existing home. With the setbacks that our current home presently has and how little space there is with the city requirements, we had a lot of negative feedback from the planning department, and in order to make the house comply with the new guidelines, there was very little left to save with the outdatedness and termite damage that the house has presently. So we started working with Mr. Oliveras in September of this past year, and we have been working very closely with Jay Platt, both with our previous architect and with Efren, to be able to design a home that would fit within the community in terms of style and feel and look, and preserve that same character home look that all the homes have. And we have been working very closely with Jay and incorporated many of his designs and suggestions in this design, and it has been an ongoing effort to try to get our designs done as soon as possible to accommodate a growing family. And the planning department has known that from the time that we submitted our plans and with the previous architect that we wish to rebuild with a second-story home. So we have been very candid in our intention, and we were instructed on the certain procedure for the design review board. We submitted plans that didn't ask for any variances, that didn't ask for any exceptions, and we were deemed complete back in February prior to the historical district approval, because it was unknown what the timeline for that was. Whether it could take another 6 months or a year or 6 weeks is unknown to anybody who's in the process in an area where that doesn't exist. So we followed the existing rules that the city of Glendale had at the time, and our architect had done a lot of due diligence and a lot of research with the city and spoken with a lot of people, and it was communicated to us that when our application was deemed complete, that was what we needed to go forward. So we had our application accepted by the city. It was deemed complete. There was a staff recommendation at that time for approval. It's apparent now that they've changed their position on that. And we were given a design review board hearing prior to the neighborhood going historical. So now here we are to share our plans with you and look to you for approval for our plans that have been ongoing. Thank you.
We'll introduce now our architect, Efren Oliveras.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, good.
Thank you. Oh, sure. Excuse me, we had a question from...
I do have a question. You
Commissioner
said
Morgan.
of the house that you have now, there's nothing left to save?
With the way that the house sits with a 3-foot setback, we were told that we must have a 10-foot setback, that there are no exceptions. That would require chopping 7 feet into a approximately 10-foot bedroom, leaving approximately 3 useless feet of nothing. If you try to do something with that, then we end up going to the living room. At that point, we lose the fireplace and the interior walls and a bathroom and part of the hallway. From the other side, if we move over where our setback is, from the carport into the kitchen, we've lost the breakfast room, the kitchen, the laundry room. If we shift those in, I've lost the dining room and the family room, and I don't know what else is left of the original interior floor plan to preserve at that point in a house that has one bedroom and no kitchen and no entry and no dining room. We have a significant amount of termite damage in the house.
That's what I was considering, that there is significant amount of termite damage.
Over $10,000 worth of termite damage as of the last report several years ago.
So no matter what happens today, you still have to deal with the termite damage?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question?
course, yeah.
Sorry.
Yes.
Not, but maybe it could be for anybody. It might even be for you. According to the demolition ordinance, I think you have to have an approved project to get a demolition permit, right?
No, we don't have that process in Glendale. When you go through the design review process, if there's a building on site and a project is approved, that approval grants the demolition as well.
So in other words, by inference or by in actuality holding it in hand, do they have a demolition permit?
No, we don't have a demolition.
don't.
We wouldn't have in this case.
Again, good afternoon. My name is Efren Olivares, and I'm the project architect. I'm a longtime resident of Glendale. I actually live in Northwest Glendale, very close to this home. And there's a series of exhibits that I brought for you. First of all, I want to thank you guys for coming out over the weekend, before and after the World Cup game, which made it interesting. But thank you for taking the time to come out and look at the properties the state is in, and certainly listen to our thoughts in terms of what we want to do with this property. I did want to expand a little bit onto how we got here. I think Christina really hit the bulk of it. But in front of you, I put together a timeline with the dates, with the dates that I consider critical since the point that I became involved with the project. And when I became involved with this project, the direction, as Christina and Eric expressed, was to build a home that met code, that did not require any variances, fulfill all the guidelines, the design guidelines. My personal philosophy as an architect is to design buildings that fit the neighborhood. My own home, I took that sort of position on the home. And when I say that, I mean that in terms of site planning, in terms of massing, in terms of the colors you select for that particular area, materials, windows, and so on. So with Jay, we worked diligently to the point we started with hand sketches, and we developed those to the project that you have in front of you today. So I became involved in this project back in September. Spent a lot of time with the owners as well as with planning. And we knew that the process for historic district designation was moving. Again, we didn't know what the timeline was or when it would happen, but we knew we had a time frame to deal with, and we knew that the goal was to submit a set of plans that was deemed complete in order to be able to go to DRB. That was very clear from the beginning. There was no question about that. That was the goal. We were able to do that. In the documentation that you have in front of you, you'll see the dates of the letters when we submitted the application, when we received the letter deemed complete, some of the review comments that were made along the way, and all the way to the DRB hearing that was set for us to present the project. I must say that there are a number of conditions and or considerations that were put forth in the report, in the initial report that Jay put together along with Rather. And I personally speaking have no issues with any of those. I know that these are design issues of minor nature on a home of this caliber, and we can certainly work our way through that. The only one that perhaps requires a little bit of maybe more conversation has to do with the terrace that was mentioned on the side of the house, practically on the southwest corner. We've spoken to the neighbors. Christina and Eric actually had a neighborhood gathering, I'm going to say a couple of months ago. And the neighbors came. They have letters of support for the project, and the neighbor next door has no issue with the terrace. And so I want that to be part of the consideration because we took that into account as we were designing this home. So we always looked at these projects as what we like to call a pipeline project. If we were doing a project on another part of the city and the city was going forward with some kind of a zone change, you don't change the rules on those people that are in process. You give them a time frame to work with, that recently happened with the fees that were going to be charged to apartment developments, and there was a rush from developers to obviously get their plans in on time. If you get them in on time, then you are entitled to certain things that were spoken to you prior to that. So that was our goal, and that's what we accomplished. I think the city approved the Brockman District March 5th, and we got approval on application being complete on February 24th. So we clearly met our time. Second diagram that you have in front of you, and this is a result of the conversations that we had with the commissioners and certainly also with the Glendale Historic Society, who came out last night, and we spent quite a bit of time, and I have to thank them also for taking time, coming out, walking the site, listening to the story and how we got here. And it attempts to tell you a little bit what would happen with the 10-foot setback. By the time you took the existing home at about a little under 2,500 square feet, and you took off a section of the house to do a 10-foot setback, then you wanted to add what's allowed by FAR. Literally, you're taking the remaining first floor, and if you double it up, you get your square footage. At that point, you have no roof. You've taken the roof off the house. You've taken off the end of the house. So how much of that is really contributing at that point? So that's a factor that went into the decision-making and into my advice to the owners, as well as the previous architect, of what they could do with this neighborhood, with this house in the neighborhood. So that's what the second diagram is trying to depict in a graphic manner for you. So in terms of the house, I think Ryder did a good presentation. Again, it's meant to be a Spanish revival, original to the true character. I have no problem working with staff to make sure we get the details right. The massing, the location of the house is consistent with every other house in the neighborhood. Our landscape architect, Guillaume Limon, is here. In case you have any questions, we ask them to be here. And so this is a new site. That tennis court will go. They don't use the tennis court. And other than that, I don't have anything else to say other than I'm obviously baffled by the process, and if this was a pipeline project, why did that change? I believe personally, and I could be wrong, if I am, I should be corrected, I believe there was no mention of this, of the fact that there was a pipeline project in the works at the time the report was made to City Council. First of all, when it went to your commission, when it went to Planning Commission, when it went to City Council, there is no mention of how to handle a project that's in the process. And so I can't blame or say, hey, the Glendale Historic Society was off base because it wasn't mentioned. If it had been mentioned like it is on every other project in the city, then you know how to handle it. That's what I believe happened. I don't know if it's true or not. But anyway, we're here. I think it's a beautiful home. I think I'm proud of the home that we've designed for them. So I'm here for any questions you may have. And again, I want to thank the commissioners, the staff, because they spent a lot of time getting to this point, and the Glendale Historical Society, and all these neighbors that are here. It's amazing to me that whatever side they're on, they're here. They got some interest in this, and this is a good thing. So, thank you.
Yeah, I have a question right now. There may be others, but the one that bubbles up to the top is, that obviously there was a pipeline activity going on with respect to zoning change that at various times was stalled, but then during the time that your project was being reviewed was in the process of moving forward, if I read the timeline that we were given correctly. Mm-hmm. And I understand, at least I think that somewhere in the guidelines, if not, it's tacitly understood that during a pipeline thing like this, where two things are running concurrently that are eventually going to converge, that there's an opportunity at any point in that process for a consultation to be done. I think, if I remember correctly, we, the Preservation Commission, have done these types of things, and both the Historic District application process and the homeowners project were running concurrently for at least a year, if not more. So my question in general is why wasn't this brought to the forefront before this progressed to the point of us tripping over, it almost feels like a horse race, it's like, when you go, somebody trips the wire first, which is not so could somebody comment on that and indicate how the process evolved like this, with this issue bubbling to the surface right at the very tail end? I mean, did it have to be that way, or was there an opportunity to do it another way?
What I can offer from my perspective is that because the goal was always to put deem the application complete prior to historic preservation. So there was never the inference or the thought of having a consultation with the commission, because it was a DRB issue. And only because it was being looked at it that way. That's all I can gather. Now,
well, yes, I think literally, if you're that's true, but everybody in the room knows that these two things were moving concurrently. So, we're here. You want to say something?
Well, I can address it for staff level. We were in error when we thought that this was in the pipeline to go to DRB. But moving forward with that presumption, we expected that if this went to DRB, it would be within DRB's right to ask that this be reviewed by the Preservation Commission. But up until that point, there's no provision. We don't have something in the ordinance that would say we would need to necessarily do that. And because we thought we were moving in the correct direction, we moved, and that's why we proceeded the way we did.
So DRB was not aware that there was a historic district in the works and that things were happening and progressing?
No, the DRB staff report clearly indicated that this was a proposed historic district, that this property had been identified as a contributor. We never went to DRB. We received a letter from the Historical Society questioning why this was going to DRB rather than HPC. And when we started reviewing it with our city attorney staff, we realized that looking at the ordinances more closely and recognizing that we had not previously established a pipeline for the type of review in a district before it's designated, that HPC was the appropriate review body. The lesson we've learned from this, and obviously it may be a little too late, but it will benefit future districts and future residents of districts, is that we're going to create an ordinance revision that will establish a clear pipeline, so this problem will never ever happen again. So we can be grateful for that. But in the meantime, we have to acknowledge that we're in this situation partly because of that.
At what time were you indicated that it would no longer go to DRB and it would come to HPC on your timeline?
About 2 o'clock in the afternoon of the DRB hearing.
Yeah, we received the letter from the Glendale Historical Society the day of the hearing, and much scrambling ensued.
Okay. So it was the Historical Society.
That was May 22nd?
Yes, May 22nd.
That's correct.
Yeah, right there.
Okay, any other questions for the applicant at this time?
And I certainly can come back up.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, so next speaker for the public hearing is Greg Grammer.
Yeah, so up until when?
Yes, my name is Greg Grammer. I'm the president of the Glendale Historical Society, a nonprofit organization representing nearly 600 individual members. Thank you, Chair, and members of the Historic Preservation Commission and city staff for the opportunity to comment on the application for this project. You've received a letter from the Glendale Historical Society recommending that the Commission deny the project and giving you the reasons why we are opposed to the demolition of a contributing structure in the Brockmont Park Historic District. I won't go over everything in the letter, but I'd like to make a few points. But before I would first like to thank the homeowners and their architect, Mr. Oliveros, for meeting with the Glendale Historical Society and inviting some of us to their home to see the property and talk about the issues at hand. And thank you, Mr. Foy and Mr. Platt, for the explanation. While TJHS is glad that the city realized that the project should be reviewed by this commission rather than the Design Review Board, We, too, have been genuinely perplexed by the way in which this application had been processed and the mixed messages that had been sent to the property owners and the community. The city was aware that there was a pending historic district and should have guided the homeowners toward a preservation alternative at the start. After all, it was the city that prepared the Brockmont Park Historic District Survey, and it was the city that determined that the home is a contributor of high integrity to the district. And, as you know, the Brockmont Park Historic District Survey was completed and approved by the city before the application was submitted. Historic districts and historic surveys are meant to add a layer of protection to prevent the demolition of historic resources. Under CEQA, both the property as a contributor and the historic district are considered historic resources. As such, under CEQA, the property must be presumed to be historically significant. Therefore, demolition of the property would result in substantial adverse change as defined by CEQA and should not be approved without proper environmental review, such as a focused EIR. This is the process that is followed in other nearby cities such as Pasadena and Los Angeles. And we strongly reject the city's analysis that demolition of a contributor to the historic district would have no environmental impact on the district, provided that the number of contributors remains above 60%. Such reasoning defies all logic and common sense and violates both the spirit and the language of the Historic District Ordinance. We believe that by applying the California State Historical Building Code or through variances, preservation alternatives exist that would meet most of the homeowner's goals while still remaining the property's architectural integrity and street presence. The Glendale Historical Society would welcome the opportunity to work with Mr. Oliveris, just as we did years ago on the preservation of the Good House, and the city to come up with a plan that is acceptable to both the property owners and the historic neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you.
Has Mr. Alvarez indicated that he's willing to meet with you?
In our meeting with the property owner and Mr. Oliveris, it was very clear that at the beginning, the homeowner's initial plan was to do an addition. And it just baffles us that they were led down this path of demolition when there could have been an alternative proposed that would have preserved the integrity of the home.
I agree on that part. So,
I don't stay there because I'm not sure who this is a question for, but is a focused EIR done in LA and Pasadena when somebody in a historic district proposes a remodel or a demolition? Does each property, and who, if so, who does that? Who hires the architectural historian or surveyist to do it? Who pays for it? And who selects the agent that's going to do the focused EIR? In LA and Pasadena, we have some good examples there.
I'll take a stab at it, but
sure.
Attorney may have view. My understanding is that any substantial adverse change, so if they are significantly altering the property, either through demolition or significant alteration, then, at least in these cities, a focused EIR would be required. Now, in most cities, and in the city, the applicant would pay for the historic assessment. But in most cities, the city chooses the consultant and not the applicant. Unfortunately, we don't have that here in Glendale yet.
Just to add from staff, while Los Angeles and Pasadena do require an EIR for a demolition of a contributor in a historic district, many other jurisdictions throughout the state do not. And we've consulted with the State Historic Preservation Office, which recognizes that the key issue that we're really looking at today is a big gray area, and that there is no jurisprudence, there's no case law on this subject, and the state preservation office, says that the city of Glendale is within its right to interpret what is a historic resource in a historic district, as we have, as long as we've been consistent, and we have been consistent since the very beginning of the historic districting process, at which point all of the local historical societies and all of the concerned citizens could have known, and it's written in the Historic District Handbook, that in Glendale we do not treat individual contributors in districts as historic resources. We look at the district as a resource. And one of the ways that I think that best expresses the confusion here also, that I think everyone here would acknowledge, in a historic district in Glendale, as in many other cities, we only review changes made to the front of the property in terms of the historic character of the district, suggesting that we're really looking at the ensemble of buildings and the character of the neighborhood. If buildings that are contributors in historic districts were to be treated as individual historic resources, it seems rather inconsistent and illogical itself to allow any change to be made to the rear facades or the non-visible parts of the building. So in my mind, as a preservationist, it's clear that Glendale made a choice in the way we crafted our historic district ordinance and established our goals for an ordinance to look at contributing structures and districts differently than we would look, certainly, at a Glendale Register property. And the main point I want to make is that on a statewide basis, we are moving forward without CEQA issues, according to the State Historic Preservation Office. We are in a gray area, so there's a lack of clarity statewide, but we certainly have been consistent since the very beginning in our thought process for this.
Could I ask? This is subjective, but what would the Glendale Historical Society want done with this property, other than keeping it there? As you've heard the applicants say, there are sufficient problems with what they want to do, what's there now, and what they want to do.
Certainly, I'm not an architect, but
right.
certainly would like to see some sort of an addition, perhaps a two-story addition, and all the other things that they're requesting to meet the needs of their growing family. I don't understand the direction that if they were to do any sort of addition, that the existing structure would then need to meet the current 10-foot setback. I think there are ways through variances or through California code that would allow for such sort of an addition.
Okay.
I can answer that question. Under the city's zoning code, for non-conforming buildings, that is those which are, perhaps as in this case, too close to the setback or closer to the property lines than would be permitted for new construction, if you remove more than 50% of the exterior wall area, or rather the supporting members of those, and of the roof combined, 50% of the walls and roof, supporting structure, if those are removed, then the entire project is considered a new building and must meet all current codes. So that's why you're talking about having to set the building back in. And I would also add that the Historic Preservation Commission cannot, and neither can the Design Review Board, condition their approval upon another discretionary action like a variance. You cannot make that part of your approval process.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
And then I just have a quick question. If you're removing more than 50% within a district and you're triggering a need to abide by the current codes, is evoking historic codes, is that not
the
for
historical
setbacks?
code wouldn't apply. The zoning code applies to all properties equally in Glendale. The historical code wouldn't help there.
Okay. Go ahead.
Just elaborating a little bit, because this is the crux of the whole decision we're going to make here today. You know, if we were to rule in favor of preventing demolition, and the only reason to do that, in my mind, right now, at this moment, would be that we are going to save this house, okay? Because it's a high-value ranch that contributes to the historic fabric of the district. The house, I don't know how many of you have seen the property. It's got a crumbling tennis court on it. It's got a, somebody shaking their head no, but you know, I saw a tennis court that's not being used and a very large part of the property that isn't being used. I see a section that's been turned into kind of a child's play area that's separate from the area. So there would definitely have to be some reconfiguration configuration of the landscaping and the house. I'd like to ask the city, you know, in the interest of everybody here, hypothetically the owners being willing to save the house as it is and put a two-story addition on it to add to the floors, the living space. Is there a clear pathway to that? Can that be done?
Anything can be done with enough money. There certainly is multiple alternatives to avoid the 50% rule. So the existing setbacks undoubtedly could be retained through various floor plan configurations if the house were to be remodeled. We tell people as we're creating historic districts and moving forward with the public education process that we are not freezing your house in time in a historic district, and we are looking for ways to allow your building to grow with your family and to be organic in that way. The question would come down to what the design would be like. If the second story completely altered the character of the present house, we would recommend against something like that. In general, we look to second stories to be moved toward the rear of lots to make them as either seamless or, in some cases, even invisible when you can, as possible. But it's impossible to answer the question because there are so many design possibilities.
Sorry.
And may I add to that, if just to clarify about adding a second story to an existing one-story house in the single-family zone, is that the zoning code also requires that for any home between the height of 20 feet and 30 feet, the existing setback needs to be at least 5 feet from the property line. So in this case, because it's a one-story house right now, if they were to go two-story, the setback we see now needs to be 5 feet. If not, then they would have to apply for a variance.
And the setback now could be 5 feet. We're not exactly sure. Is that right?
Yes. It appears to be 5 feet, but I don't have the exact measurement.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go
No,
ahead, Commissioner Moore.
Just when the applicant came to talk to you, I mean, it seems like the one thing that they want is to get rid of a ranch style and put in a Mediterranean revival type of house. Mm-hmm. Did you suggest them staying with the ranch style? I mean, I don't know if this should be brought up now, but...
Well, you're catching me in an embarrassing moment because I do not remember initial discussions about the earlier house. I'm not denying that it happened.
Sorry.
I personally don't remember, and I'm not denying it. We would never lead someone to...
Well, I know you wouldn't.
We would never say, why don't we just demolish the house and move forward, so it wasn't... But we are always, through our design review, responsive to the needs and the goals of owners. That's our job as staff, is to facilitate the process to bring the owner's goals to the hearing situation, whether it's DRB or HPC, and that's what we did. And I will have to really go back into my memory banks and notes to remember what we did there.
To embarrass you.
No, that's not the first time.
Okay. Let's go back to our speakers, and this is a very difficult discussion, so we digress a bit. The next speaker is Kathy Beckley.
Am I the only one sweating in here?
No, it's hot.
I hate being alone. I'm Kathy Beckley. I live on Lawson Place. Thank you for letting me be here. I'm very proud to be a part of the historic neighborhood, Blackman Historic Neighborhood. But I'm very disappointed right now. I don't really hear a lot of what's happening, or the technical terms. I don't understand. But the thing that's disappointing me is that this family came into the neighborhood, bought their house with a dream to change it into something else. And this is way before we became a historic. She got pregnant, and they delayed the building again. And I feel bad for the family, and I feel bad for a dream that has to be ratified by everybody else's judgment. Am I making sense?
Yes.
So it just makes me sad because I love where I live. I'm not that crazy about that house. It's a sore eye, like you said, the tennis court and all that. I've been waiting for a long time for somebody to change and better that part of the neighborhood, But I just feel bad for the family. I'd like to see that their dream proceed as they planned in the first place when they bought that house with every intention of changing it to enrich in their family. So thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Okay, the next speaker is Richard Lieboff.
Good evening, Commissioners. I am Richard Lieboff, and I am a 35-year resident of the jewel city of Glendale, and I have been witness to what's been going on for this situation for several years now, since the start of the Brockmont Park Historic District. Jay may have a short memory of what occurred, but I do not have a short memory of what occurred and what occurred between himself and the residents of that home. It was very clear from the very start when we wanted to create a historic district. He consulted with them and he expressed to them that he would work with them. Working with them meant renovating the house, expanding the house. Never in any public discussion at least was there talk of demolishing the house and doing what they now intend to do. They have lived there for 9 years. I live directly across from the tennis court, so I have seen that tennis court, and to their credit, they actually did something several years ago which I was happy to see. What did they do? They put up some bushes covering that tennis court because, yes, it was a tremendous eyesore for a number of years. In fact, today, their gardener was even trimming the bushes a little bit, which they hadn't done before since they've been put up in the last 3 years. So some progress has been made, but it is very clear that they, in my opinion, slipped under the wire. And the dates that Mr. Platt has presented about the fact that the district was created at the end of, or the approval and so forth process occurred towards the end of February, and they submitted their plans. I believe the date was February 28th, and the district was created on March 8th or 5th, whatever the date was. It was clear that it was very close in time, when in fact this family has had 8 years. And yes, maybe they didn't have the children then. That is correct. And by the way, the comment that neighbors were invited to hear the plans, I who live right directly in the back, of course, as you know from having visited the property, it is a street-to-street lot. So my side, Arbor Drive, is the public right-of-way. So what is seen from the front and what is seen from the back needs to be considered in the design of whatever property would be created there. And I'll tell you openly, and I would have told them too, I'm not opposed to the expansion of the property. That is nothing that I have ever expressed disapproval of, but I am opposed to demolition. Let me get to some of my other points. As you know, we are here this evening to consider a matter that has bounced around and is now appropriately before you for your consideration. It is a matter that has been a travesty from the very beginning, and it is a matter that should have been dealt with long before this evening. It is a matter, in fact, that is not unfamiliar to those in the Community Development Department, Planning Division. Clearly, it was an oversight from the time that the Glendale Historic District Overlay Ordinance was created in January 2008. As you may know, I have tried myself to call it to the attention of the Glendale City Council over the last several months. When this was first introduced, I went before the council to bring it to their attention. And when they learned, in fact, that the property was going to be demolished, they, like I, was totally appalled and embarrassed because it was during the month of May, which was Historic Preservation Month, and when, in fact, we had the situation in Montrose, La Crescenta about the property being demolished there. So it was something that has been known but has not been fully addressed by city staff. And seemingly, the attitude has been that this could be an exception. Mr. Platt himself said that this evening, that we could possibly demolish 1555 Valley View Road, and then we'll correct the problem later on. I hope you would not take that same attitude, that just because there was a slip-up, that we would allow a historically significant property to be demolished. I do not believe U.S. commissioners on this esteemed body would want to see a contributing and historically significant ranch-style, mid-century home demolished and replaced with a Calabasas-style Spanish colonial revival residence. As you may know, when brought before the council, and as I indicated before, they were appalled that this could occur, that the house could be demolished in a newly created district a week after it's been created. Other points, germane points that I would add to my presentation this evening, the subject property, and Greg has already discussed part of this, is not categorically exempt from CEQA, as the Planning Division seems to believe, and as they put in their report. They seem to favor that it be exempt from CEQA. In the Brockman Park Historic Resources Survey, the property was found to be historically significant and a contributing home because of its historic and architectural significance. It is critical to the character and the integrity of the historical district. The fact that Rather Dung, in his report, classified 1555 Valley View as not one of the remaining examples of its kind is not a sufficient reason to allow demolition. In addition, preference by the owners of this property for a Spanish colonial revival residence is also an insufficient reason to allow demolition of this property. And again, I emphasize that putting a house of this character up, even the size of it, which is, of course, up to the very maximum of the FAR. The FAR, I think, allows 4533. This is slightly over 4,500 square feet. They have gone to the max. And from the report that was posted online, I haven't seen whatever was submitted in the last few days, the form emails and the letter from the Glendale Historical Society, and also whatever the Northwest Glendale Homeowners Association expressed, they were all categorically opposed to demolition of this residence. No emails or letters have been presented, at least online, in favor of the demolition. And as I indicated, they may have had meetings with other neighbors, but they certainly didn't invite me to meet with them, and I would have welcomed meeting with them. And as I'm indicating to you at this point, of course, I would not oppose expansion of the house, although I think it does need to be kept in the style of that is there. And if that means setting back part of it, and they could even add a second story, and if it's done correctly, it could be done in a style that would be commensurate with a ranch-style house. And I think other neighbors would feel likewise. So in summary, I urge you, the Historic Preservation Commission, to take the aforementioned points into consideration and find that the demolition of 1555 Valley View Road as a contributing structure is not keeping in with the goals of the Brockman Park Historic Overlay Zone and the Glendale Historic District Overlay Zone Ordinance. There is nothing compelling about the replacement Spanish colonial revival style home to merit demolition of a part of the fabric of the historic district from the adopted period of significance. As such, I respectfully request that the Historic Preservation Commission deny demolition of the ranch-style residence at 1555 Valley View Road. Thank you for allowing me to present to you this evening. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to answer them.
Just one real quick question. There 10 of the 13 ranch-style houses are in the district, and it's considered not one of the top. Where would you rate this house as far as between the other 10 homes?
I would rate it equally, if not better. For one thing, it's on a larger piece of property than any of the other ranch-style residences. Most of them are very close together. This one, as you know from having visited it, has a circular driveway, which obviously, from the pictures, they want to retain their circular driveway. But to make it a Calabasas-style home, I think is just totally out of the question. They have had all these years of living there. If their family was expanding, they had opportunity to move elsewhere. Why did they buy a ranch-style home would be my question. And they bought a ranch-style home, obviously, that they felt met their needs. They knew they were going to have a family. They felt good about the house. And as far as the condition of the house, maybe you have been inside the house. I have pictures from when the house was sold to them 9 years ago. I visited the house 9 years ago. The house was not falling apart 9 years ago. I don't know what's happened in the last 9 years that the house started falling apart or that there was termite problems. We all live in Southern California. We expect that there are going to be termite problems in our homes.
So you feel this is one of the better examples in the
Absolutely.
district?
It's one of the few examples that is a very wide house because, as you can see from the map, the front of the house has a very large setback, so it distinguishes it among the other ranch-style homes, which are all very clustered together because they were added at different points in time.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
The next speaker is Dave Gubner.
Dubser.
Sorry.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. My name is Dave Gubser. I'm a resident of the Brockmont Park Historical District. I have been a resident off and on since 1963 when my parents moved to Glendale and purchased a home on Arbor Drive, which they had in our family for 50 years. I'm currently the partner of Mr. Lieboff, and yes, we do reside directly behind this property. And what I would like to say is that this property will not only the changing of this property will significantly impact people on Valley View, their direct neighbors, but also us on Arbor Drive, especially our home. And I think that we need to be included a little bit. Like Richard said, they didn't ask us to their meeting, so we weren't able to discuss with them anything, but we are really closely related to that house being directly behind it. So, yes, we are worried about the demolition of this house and how it will affect our property. And seeing the house here on the screen, to me, my initial reaction was, it is too big, too much. It's a McMansion, a Spanish McMansion going up in a historical district. It doesn't seem like that is a good thing for Brockmont Park. Thank you.
Before you sit down, excuse me, what style of home do you happen to live in?
Monterey Revival House.
Okay, thank
built
you.
in 1928.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is Bill Steinke.
I'm sorry, Bill had to leave. He took longer than he thought. He did ask me to stay, though, that is.
You have to come and
come forward, please.
Bill Stanky had to leave. And as he said, wanted me to tell everybody that he and his wife agreed with the project and were very happy with what they saw of it when they went over and saw the plans. So he lives above their house. Not in the historical area, but right above it.
Okay. Could you share your name for the record, please?
Bob Hinkle.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is, sorry, you'll have to help me, Bernard Gibson?
Hi.
I'm not good at reading handwriting.
That's all right. I've got a bad handwriting. I grew up playing football, so excuse me. I'm not a part of the historical district. I live just above there, so I kind of look down on it. I'm also new to the Glendale area. And so I've seen some of the growth. I've seen some of the homes on sale. My wife and I have lived here for approximately 4 years. We live up on Kempton Road. What puzzles me is, and I can tell you, I'm for them being able to rebuild their home. I'm for that, for a lot of reasons. One, this is a new district that you've established, and I believe that if I've spent my money for my home, I should have some forewarning or say that I'm moving into this district and as to what the meaning of it is. My next thing about it is this. Up on Kempton Road at 311 Kempton, a similar ranch-style home was demolished, and they're now building a 4,000 square foot view property there. Looks like it's going to be a beautiful home. It looks very similar to the one that they have down on Valley View. Same approximate size that they're talking about building there that these guys are talking about building. So in reading the newspaper about what's going on, it was very puzzling to my wife and I as to why this has come about. I'm glad I'm attending this meeting because I think I understand a little bit better. By trade, I'm a commercial real estate broker. And with that in mind, if this was a commercial property and I was in the pipeline to get my business approved prior to the establishment of the historical district, I think I should have been on that same path. I should stay on that same path. No new rules and regulations should be thrown at me because it requires a lot of money, energy, and time to create all those renderings and do all those kinds of things in order to get through that approval process. And to me, it would be extremely unfair and create a major hardship on the family to say, stop, guys, start all over again. Okay? Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. The next speaker is Catherine Yurka.
Hi, I'm still Catherine Yurka, and I'm here on behalf of the Glendale Historical Society. It is impossible not to have a great deal of sympathy for the homeowners in this case. And I was grateful for the invitation to visit them in their house and meet with the architect and hear about their plans and to have a very good, productive discussion with them. Based on their story and my own experience of this case over the last few months and what Mr. Foy was saying and Mr. Platt, it is very clear that they received some very poor advice and instructions from the city during this process. But demolition is the most serious action that can be taken against a contributing property in a historic district. Above all else, the historic district ordinance and guidelines are designed to prevent it. Demolition of contributors and their replacement with non-contributing houses inevitably impacts and erodes the character and quality of a historic district. The fact that the city continues to indicate that it is permissible to pick off contributors one by one so long as a 60% threshold is not crossed only proves to me how profoundly it fails to understand this basic point. Because a historic district is a constellation of structures, each contributor contributing to and telling a story within the context of the whole, I venture to suggest that it really doesn't matter if this house is a lesser example of the ranch style, which I think is a matter of interpretation and opinion, nor does it matter that it lacks many of the character-defining features of its style. What gives any house its distinctive character is precisely its individual configuration of elements. Also, the house is no less a contributor because it falls toward the end of the period of significance. By that logic, one could just as easily argue that the oldest house within a district is ripe for demolition because it falls at the beginning of the period. One of our preservation professionals spoke with the same State Historic Preservation Office, and we were told something quite different. And they suggested to us that Glendale is misinterpreting CEQA and state law. At the first City Council meeting on 1720 Grandview, the City Attorney said that a point-by-point response to our claims about CEQA had been prepared. We have asked both him and the Planning Department for a copy. If we're wrong, we would like to know it. In the absence even of a reply to our request for this document, which is almost as mysterious as your supplemental CEQA analysis that was not part of the official packet, we can only assume that its case for declaring any of these properties exempt under CEQA is weak, based as it is on the argument that the subject property, as a contributor to a historic district, is not a historic resource, even though it is established as such in the city's own documentation. So this same preservation professional spoke today with Roger Kiesel, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, in planning, and he also said that for a project of this height, there would be a 5-foot setback required, not a 10-foot setback. But he also indicated that as a contributor within a historic district, as a historic resource, that it might receive an exception to that setback requirement, and that it would be very, very likely to receive a variance as a historic resource. So we hope that an alternative solution could still be found that would allow for the owners to meet their project goals, make the space requirements they feel they need for their family, and allow the house to expand but remain a contributor. And that is a solution that TGAS would be happy to endorse. Thank you.
Thank you.
I do have a question for Jay.
Yes.
Well, this kind of thing that says that the city is allowing properties to be picked off, until it's just to 60%, the city has never, ever, that's never your intention.
That's not the intention of the ordinance. It's not the intention of staff. I can't imagine that it would be the intention of the commission or of city council at any point. But we do have a process. The ordinance does allow applicants to propose demolition within a historic district, and that's why we have this public process where we hear all sides of the story and, rely on the judgment and decision-making of our experts on HPC and possibly if it went to council on an appeal. But the idea that we're just waiting for districts to erode to 60%, I'm a passionate preservationist personally. I can say with a very straight face that I disagree with some of the CEQA issues that the Historical Society is raising, but I also can say that there's no way that anyone in my position doing what I'm supposed to do would ever guide people down the path and expect that to happen as a natural outcome of the way we treat CEQA in Glendale.
I think there's some misinterpretation of your statement. I think because there's a certain percentage of properties that must be in place in order to become a historic district. Therefore, you have to address that issue, that if demolition was to occur, the percentage would still be acceptable, keeping the district intact. And I think there's a misunderstanding that they're taking that as if you are supporting and encouraging the reduction of that percentage to a certain point. And that's completely not what we're saying, and I think it's not what staff is saying. It's making a point that we would still be in the range as we must be to retain a district.
Right. If the commission were to approve the demolition of the house, we can say that the district would still exist, and as Glendale interprets this, we would not be violating CEQA. If I can also address one other thing, just in terms of my conversation with SHPO, the consultant who was mentioned. When I spoke to SHPO, I spoke with Lucinda Woodward, who's kind of in charge of certified local government issues, and she acknowledged that she had spoken with the consultant mentioned, and said that she said to me exactly what she said to the consultant. So I don't know how much variation there could be, whether it's through interpretation, but it's very clear through my notes, and I've had I've had more than two, but two recent conversations with the same woman at SHPO, and they've both been very consistent in acknowledging they don't support or not support our position at this point, but they acknowledge that many municipalities behave differently and have different interpretations of how they look at their historic districts, and she did not indicate in any way that we were violating anything that she believes to be true at this point.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make another point of how the actions of this commission or of any of the city's boards, like the Design Review Board or Planning Hearing Officer of the Planning Commission, they run in parallel with CEQA review, but they're not exactly the same things. Just because this commission, the demolition of a building doesn't reach a level of significance under CEQA, doesn't mean that you automatically have to approve it. And there are many parallel examples in the other areas of CEQA. The Planning Commission could deny an alcohol permit because they're concerned about the way noise might impact neighbors without it really reaching the threshold of a significant noise impact under CEQA. You don't have to wait for that very high bar of CEQA impacts to be reached before you make your own decision on whether something is appropriate. So I just want to clarify that these things do not absolutely have to go together as people sometimes seem to think.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is, and I apologize, I can barely make out the last name, Molly Miller? Malloy.
Thank you very much. My name is Terry Malloy. I live at 320 Brockmont with my lovely wife, Kathy, and we've been there for 16 years. We get to walk by the property almost on a daily basis. We walk our dog. And I would like to be, I'm in support of our neighbors to demolish their home and build a new home. Number one, we love our neighborhood. We love our architecture, and we really love the folks that are in our neighborhood. And I was so great to hear Kathy say something about the human element of this family. It's very, very appropriate. But really what I do want to say is that these folks have really played by the rules. And the house that's coming down, quite honestly, and my opinion is obviously, I'm not an architect, but it's had its day. And I think that's also reflected in the staff report here where we say, although the building has high integrity, it's a simple design, lacks many of the character-defining features, et cetera. That's all in the report. I'm not going to regurgitate that. But I would agree with that. And quite honestly, these folks have been there for 9 years. They're willing to put in what looks like a gorgeous house, and your architect did just a fabulous job. I mean, it's big, but it's a good-looking house. And they're going to enhance our community by doing this. They could go to Calabasas and do that. They want to stick here. They want to raise their family here, and we're kind of putting them through the ringer on this deal. And we just wanted to come down and say we support them, and good luck to you. So, thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Sorry, are you in the historic district?
No, I'm right on we're on Brockmont Drive, so we're right, we butt up against it, but we walk by every day.
Thank you.
What will I do?
Yes. Sorry,
Okay.
could you come back for one more?
Sorry. Were you
Were
you in favor of the historic district when it was coming out?
Yeah, I think we've got, I understand why you guys are here and what you do, because you walk around our neighborhood and there are a lot of really cool homes, some of which aren't in that district. I mean, Clemencia and Romeo have that Paul Williams. There's some really just dynamite houses, and we don't. And we think there needs to be some oversight in regards to what you're going to do in the neighborhood and how you're going to build and what you're going to build, and it needs to complement it. And I think certainly we've been there for 16, 17 years now. We want it to be a nice place for everybody, and we think they're enhancing it. So I guess to answer your question, yeah, we
Okay.
do. So sorry, it's a long answer.
Fine.
Thank you. Okay, the next speaker is, I think, Rebecca Hinkle.
Thank you, Commissioners. I'm probably one of the oldest, youngest people living in the neighborhood outside of maybe. I've been in our house. I'm at 356 Cumberland. I've owned several properties in Glendale. And in fact, at the time that this historical started, I owned 2 houses that had to be signed off on. But just to kind of give you an idea, because we had 2 in that area. But the point of it is what we're here to support is our neighborhood. I've lived in the house for 39 years. My son was born in the house. He's 35 years old. He's my youngest. It means a lot to me. I live in a Spanish Revel on Cumberland. When I bought the house, it had louvered windows in it, no tile on the roof, and I've restored it back. And I'm in favor of keeping restoration to the homes. But this house in particular adds no value to our community. Now, let me tell you a little bit about our community, so you'll understand why you're seeing people coming from all different directions and different streets. About 16 years ago, or thereabouts, I started bringing the neighborhood together. Where I live is between Merriman and Columbus, almost from block to block. So we'd sit outside and we'd see people coming by, almost 20 years ago, right? That's my husband, by the way. And I thought, you know what? I'm the only one in the neighborhood that knows everybody, because I talk to them, they come by the house, they walk, I've been there for so long. I think we need to have a block party. So we started having block parties. And they became very, very popular. We had bands, we did fundraisers for the school, different functions, live entertainment, 250 people plus. Everybody was invited, whether they wanted to come or not, and it brought the community together. They enjoyed each other. We watched out for each other. We still do. This project has torn apart what I put 38 years into putting together, because everybody is angry. Yesterday, after the news press came out, my phone was going. What is going on, Becky? Why is this happening? My question is, again, why is it here? It was approved. Doesn't approval mean anything? Or are we setting a standard that we can always back up and change the rules after they've been put in place? Now, I'm not against the historical. I understand that we need that. I have the old Spanish, 1922. And my house isn't much smaller than what they're going to make, by the way. It takes up a lot of area. It's on a 16,000 square foot plus. And I think you guys really need to take in consideration how this is affecting our community for something that should never have made it to this level. They're great people. They've been at the block parties. They've helped. Everybody here that I pulled together, calling, asking them to come in less than one day. And if that doesn't tell you something about our neighborhood, and there was more to be coming, but they couldn't do it in the last minute, which comes to a point that why weren't we acknowledged about this? We had no acknowledgement. We had to read in the newspaper. So with that being said, I think you need to take in consideration some of the things that folks have said about the property. I agree with Bernard. Excuse me, with Terry. It's ran its course. It still has an old kitchen. If you put this on a scale for me, it's a 1 if it's in part of the 10. I had, by the way, the other house I owned at the time was a California ranch. So I had both of them. But that's not the point. We're not here to really scrutinize what the house is, a 1 or a 10. I think the whole purpose of this is that you have an approval. Mr. Platt stood in front of us when we had the first meeting and said, number 1, if you can get your approval through in time, you've got it. And you said that in front of 70 people that came, or 60 people that day. Now, there was a lot of people there, because I asked the question too. The other thing you have to keep in consideration, whether you decide to not allow them to demolish or you allow them to have to do whatever they want to do to it, they are now in a historical district, and they are back to back on 2 streets. As I understand, Mr. Platt explained to me, all angles of that house is now going to be reviewed by the historical. So whether you keep it the way it is, and he said to us, you can keep it the way it is. There's no grandfather clause in it. So we can sit there and look at that ugly tennis court, or we can turn it around and make it a beautiful home that's going to be an asset to the price and the value of our properties and bring our community back together. I appreciate your time.
May I ask a question for Jay?
Go ahead.
Was the notification in the front yard updated with the date of the meeting when it changed from DRB to historic preservation?
No. Yeah, we do. The sign was changed.
Thank
Then
you.
the applicant chose to change the sign. It's not a requirement when we
Okay, thank you.
hold something to a date certain.
Also, Jay, since the lot does face two different streets, would there be any restrictions on what can be done with landscaping or, in terms of removal of the tennis court? Or
The tennis court could be removed, probably without commission review. We'd have to look at that more closely if the proposal came in. I think what Ms. Hinkle was alluding to is in a historic district where we review aspects of the property visible from the public right-of-way. Because this is a through-block lot, we look at it both from Valley View and from Arbor.
Which is a good point. But I also do want to mention that in terms of historic districting, we do not look at the interior of homes at all. We only look at those portions of the home that can be viewed from the public right-of-way. And as we said, in this instance, the home would be viewed from both streets. The next speaker is Michael Hunt.
Thank you for your time. I'm trying to make this kind of like short and sweet. I understand the historical issues. I live on Brockmont, but I don't know why this is even being considered since the application was approved in February. I fully support them raising the house and putting another property in. There's several houses in the neighborhood that look in the style of what they're proposing. And like I said, the application was approved in February. I don't know why a new March law comes into effect that should be affecting them. It just doesn't seem fair.
Same question.
Jay, can you please touch on the process just to advise application being deemed complete versus approval?
Sure. An application is complete when all of the required submittal portions of the application are in. That's where we have enough materials to move the application forward to the design review body, whether it's HPC or DRB. Yes. So there was no approval of the project.
No, but approval of the application, usually in Los Angeles, I'm a general contractor by trade, but commercial general contractor. And when the applications are approved in Los Angeles, for example, that sets the grandfathering.
Los Angeles doesn't have a design review process the way Glendale does, so whether you're in a district or outside of a district, we have a very different process than LA. So that there was no approval granted at that point, obviously.
But there was an application which should trigger grandfathering.
No, there's still public review of all new construction of single-family homes in Glendale, whether you're in a district or not.
Okay. Well, anyway, my opinion was that I think the family's being mistreated, and I, would hope that you would give them some consideration, being the time frame that they've been going through the process. So, thank you.
Thank you.
One question. So are you in the district or you're outside the district?
It's a Brockmont district, and I'm on Brockmont, which isn't a part of it.
It is part.
It is not a part of it. Brockmont is not a part of the Brockmont district.
Okay.
Every street around me is, but Brockmont's not.
When
to my surprise.
Were you in favor or not?
Absolutely in favor.
In favor. Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our last speaker is Sean Bursell. Okay, I'll look for it. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman and members of the Commission. I am Sean Bursell, Executive Director of the Glendale Historical Society, and I just wanted to address an issue that was brought up by Commissioner Shire. The Historical Society is not saying, we are not saying that staff is encouraging demolition of contributors in historic districts. What we are reacting to is on page 37 of the staff report under item, I believe it's at the end of B, the last paragraph. And I will quote, "As indicated above, 52 of the 59 homes in the district are considered contributors to the district, which amounts to 88%. The demolition of the home located at 1555 Valley View would result in 51 of the 59 homes being considered as contributors to the district, which amounts to 86%, well within the established threshold of 60% or 26% above the minimum threshold necessary for the district to retain its validity. As a result, the demolition of the residents would not impact the district. We find that argument and the logical extension of it to be absurd. What that is saying is, because there are still far above 60% of the homes as contributors, it doesn't impact the historic district, and it only becomes an impact when the contributors fall below 60%. That can't be what was intended when historic districts were established, that you can demolish contributors within a district as long as it doesn't hit the 60% threshold, which would destroy the district. So I just wanted to clarify that, because I think there was some misunderstanding about our argument. And the final thing is, I just wanted to, it's been brought up by several people, beautiful house, an outstanding example of the style, ugly house, etc. It doesn't matter. Preservation is not about beauty. A contributor is a contributor, and one contributor is not a better contributor than another contributor. They're all contributors. And we need to keep that in mind, that, of course, beauty is subjective, but that's not what, when you're talking about a contributing structure, whether you think it's beautiful or whether you think it's ugly. It's a contributor and should be treated as such. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for your clarification. Jay, could you advise, would the word jeopardize be a better word than impact in that sentence you stated?
Jeopardize the eligibility of the district?
Yeah. Because I think I still don't think staff is saying, nor would we ever say, that the loss of one would have no impact. I think your sentence meant it wouldn't have an impact on the percentage, meaning it wouldn't jeopardize this district being a district.
Yes,
is that a true?
That is clear.
Maybe we could have had a better word choice with causing some.
And just to reiterate what Mr. Foy said before, CEQA is a parallel process. We have a historic district ordinance that certainly does not encourage the serial demolition of contributing structures in historic districts. But it is the city's belief that CEQA is invoked in a district situation only at the point where a district itself is jeopardized. That certainly doesn't mean that we're going to ever get to that point, and I think all of us hope and expect that we never would.
But I think the true statement is the loss of any house absolutely impacts at some level the district.
Oh,
and
sure.
that is not what that sentence, I think, was really saying it doesn't impact, meaning jeopardize, rather than it has no impact and has, there's no concern to lose.
It has no impact under CEQA, but it certainly changes the character of the block, the street, and possibly the overall district. Sure, and that's something that the commission would have to weigh in its consideration of whether a demolition and new construction is appropriate in a district or not.
Well, and then I guess at some level that opens up when you lose one to demolition, and then maybe you have a second one that doesn't impact the integrity of the percentage, and a third one and a fourth one. Where do you stop?
Well, we can discuss that, but I think
right now
you also realize it's very.
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry. A little bit of clarification. What Mr. Basal was reading from were some suggested findings. We've included in the packet some draft findings for the commission to consider whether you want to approve the project or whether you want to deny the project. As you said before, staff has not taken a position, a recommendation on this, so I take a little bit of exception to his statement that this means staff is advocating this point of view. It is not about CEQA, this particular finding that he's referencing. So it is about the integrity and character of the historic district. And in that aspect, I would actually kind of agree with him that a strict numerical accounting probably isn't the best way to judge the impact, small I impact under our historic preservation ordinance. I'm just going to make up a completely hypothetical example. If you had a long linear district like a Cannery Row or something like that, and a contributor right in the middle got demolished and replaced with something modern versus a contributor that was at the very end, I mean, perhaps someone could make an argument that they're not equally placed within the district and their demolitions would not weigh equally. I mean, I think that's the sort of thing, the kind of judgment you would have to make, not just on location, but whatever, when considering this, not just a numerical standard. So in that aspect, I do agree with him.
If I could add one other thing about findings, staff did not create findings for the commission to review, either pro or con on this project. The findings that are required for the commission to approve a demolition in a historic district are carefully laid out in the historic district ordinance. And there are 6 findings that the commission can consider as it reviews a process like this. What staff did was draft potential findings for either outcome following that outline of the 6 basic categories of the findings.
And the commission is free to edit them.
Madam Chairwoman, may I just clarify? I was not reading from the findings. I was reading from attachment 7, which is page 37 of the package.
It's actually section 7, page 3.
I just wanted to clarify that, if there was some confusion. Thank you.
Yeah, it's page 3, right there.
Do you have it?
Section 7, page 3.
Attachment 7?
Attachment
Yeah,
7.
attachment 7, page 3. Middle of the page.
Page 2 we have.
Well,
Page 2, 4th paragraph from the top.
Page 2.
Okay, well, I mean, the same wording is in attachment 9. So we don't have the same page numbering you do.
Okay.
So,
it's not me.
Does that count as your presentation?
Okay, we'll move forward. The next speaker is Louise Peebles.
She announced herself already.
Apologize for that. My name is Louise Peebles. I do not live in the Brockmont district. I happen to live in the North Cumberland Heights Historic District. And many may wonder why in the world I would be here or be so interested in this as I am. I believe, I could be wrong, but I believe I'm one of the only 2 people in the room who was on the committee back many, many years ago that drafted the guidelines for historic districts in Glendale. I guess I would like to make a number of observations, and then I think I have formulated an opinion after listening to everything here today. Obviously, I think... Oh, I am so sorry. I thought I turned it off. I apologize. Obviously, when we worked on this many years ago, it was a huge undertaking. And it seems now we've come to a point where it would be necessary to relook at some of what took place, some of what is in place, and especially in the area of timelines, let's call it. Timelines for when applications are put in, such as become a problem here when the application for the district was moving along. And there is a stated number of days for certain things to happen and to be finalized. I don't have it in front of me. I didn't know that might come up, but there is a time frame as to how many days are allowable for certain parts of the process. The applicants obviously were working on this for quite some time, and yes, it came into a collision course with the development of the district itself. And I'm glad Mr. Platt did clarify there is a significant difference in the paperwork being presented as compared to presented for moving forward as compared to final approval on the part of an applicant. I think that there's going to be other situations. There was one over in our district recently where timing as to when they did certain things, there was a great deal of disagreement. So I think there are some issues that will, and I know there's two particular council people very, very concerned and interested in looking at the time frames of things. Having said all that, though, and I have gone by this property personally 2 times to look at it, and if I'm interpreting some of the material here on in the report correctly, I may seem like I'm going to jump around a bit. It's not my intention, but some things don't flow perfectly. One of the things that I did notice here in the comparison of the neighborhood and the proposal, and if I am not misinterpreting this, when you look at house size of this proposed new house, if I'm reading this correctly, it would now, I believe, be the largest house size, the subject property proposal at 4,530 feet, bigger than the average by about 1,200, and even bigger than the largest house currently within 300 linear feet. When I looked at the story poles and I looked at the proposed placement of the house, I drove around the backside, could kind of see where the tennis court is, could see the children's play area, all of those things. And then I looked across at the homes, and I had no idea who owned them, some of the people here tonight. This new house home would be really would not obstruct totally any views those people had, but it certainly would change it. I do want to comment one thing that was said in when you reviewed the proposed house as far as its second story, and it was Mr. Duong said that the house on either side is also 2 stories. Yes, but the house to the left is a considerably different type of 2-story than would be this house. I am not an architectural specialist, but the house next door, its second floor area is more in the nature of dormers or large area but it's not a full second story in the manner that this second story would be. So this is going to rather dwarf that house to the left as far as its size. And as I say, it would be the largest. I also have concerns because I happen in my house, our house could be considered, as of the survey that was done in the North Cumberland District, we could be considered one of the on the Glendale Register of Historic Homes. We have not chosen to do that so far, but because of that, I have made, and because I was on that original committee, I've made myself aware of a lot of the issues that take place with individual homes. I spoke before the City Council actually on behalf of the applicant in another situation just last month. I am not without sympathy for applicants and what they face. But sometimes I think that we are not looking at certain things. One of them being when you talk about visible from the public right-of-way. Anybody like my husband and I who are on a corner, we face that. It's not as though this is an unheard of thing to have to face that it's not just the front of your house that is observable. In the case of this property, once they put this proposed garage on the back there, that is a pretty sizable element in and of itself. It's a 3-car garage. And if I'm correct, as I drove down that Arbor Street, there are no other garages, I don't think, facing out that side. I didn't see anything but shrubbery of different heights. I could be wrong, and if I am, someone can correct me. But I certainly didn't see anything as large as what would be, I think, a 3-story garage. I'm open to correction. I'm wrong?
Car, not story. 3-car garage.
A 3-car garage, yeah, not story, excuse me. Thank you. 3-car garage. So that I find a bit troublesome because that is viewable from the public right-of-way. And at the moment, it's hedges. And yes, you can see through. We can see through lots of properties. And okay, maybe the tennis court isn't any great beauty at the moment, but there are shrubs there. There won't be once that 3-car garage is there. If the applicant has been living in the house close to 9 years. I heard somebody else say I think they were there 5 years. I do have sympathy. I have had to tent my house in the years that I've lived there. Termites are a rather common occurrence here. I don't know why you'd be waiting till your house is ready to really disintegrate before you take care of that, no matter whether you have a historic house or just a house, whatever it is. So I can't draw too much sympathy on that, or the kitchen that hasn't been remodeled. I'll have to say, during the process of forming the guidelines, I was one of the people that tended to try to be more on the committee towards concern for the expenses incurred and the disturbance to applicants or to people in these homes. And yet I do have to keep reminding all of us, this is what's viewable from the public right-of-way. I'm sorry if the interior of the house is not workable or is not workable for the current family as it's evolved, but that's not what's taking place here. What's taking place here is a house that is in a historic district. And as these people moved along in their process of getting ready to apply for these changes or additions or total demolishing, they knew the other was being worked on, that being a historic district. And of course, I certainly don't know them, and I can't say what they're. I understand the word pipeline. I've watched and been around enough city council and what have you. I'll have to say things in the pipeline when you're talking commercial and such, and you say that the builders or contractors really move fast when something's in the pipeline and they're scared of deadlines coming. I totally agree. And that's not wrong to apply that also to individuals. It does tend to make certain people somewhat suspicious or wonder why you would not have done a little bit more on this earlier. That being as it may, I'm sorry, I am a member, and I've been an active member of the Glendale Historical Society. Another observation, totally different. I do not happen, my home, as I say, is a potential home for the Glendale Register. I've looked into things. I do not happen to be one of the people who agrees that every contributing house is a resource. I happen to agree with what I have heard Mr. Platt say about the district being the total resource. And I think that our Historical Society, as much as I admire all the work, I take part in it. I think sometimes they can get a little bit adamant about certain details and be a little bit hard to move off of center. But I don't think that you can, on the other hand, say that you shouldn't look at individual houses within a grouping. Of those houses that are the same as this, I don't happen to think it's the prettiest or the nicest. It is a contributor, and to that extent, it's important that it be looked at. I don't think that all contributors are the same, that's for sure. This isn't one of the best examples, I don't think, of those houses. I said I might sound like I was sort of disjointed in my comments, and I maybe am, but I have listened to everything here. I'm sorry for what the community has ended up fractious, upset. Historic districting is not the smoothest process in any respect, and deciding about people's property is a very personal, very potentially upsetting situation. I know when our district was put together, not everyone who had been such real good friends found a lot of sympathy with each other. It was difficult. So I'm sorry that you're experiencing that within your community. But that having been said, I really have trouble taking the side that this house should be demolished. I feel that you're just removing a house to be removing a house, and without consideration that this is a historic district, and you're going to build another new house that's somewhat of an example of what was a style of houses. And it will be lovely. I'm sure it would be. But I respectfully submit that I think the demolition is not the appropriate way to go. I can see there will not be easy to remodel this house, if that was the old term we used to use. A second story, there is certainly plenty of room on the back portion of the house to add back on the back area, big property. And I think that those are probably more things that should be considered. So I would have to say a lot of different thoughts, and but I don't think I would want you to support the demolition of the house. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for your comments. That was our last speaker, so we'll now close the public hearing. I guess we'll start our deliberations, and as Commissioner Shire, yes? Would you like to rebut?
Yes,
Please,
yes.
come on up. My apologies. We'll reopen the public hearings for rebuttal.
Thank you. I sit as a commissioner sometimes when I do the exact same thing, so I get a little excited myself. Just wanted to clarify something. The issue of 50% remodeling a home of this size is a very difficult one. It's actually something that I considered and looked at, given the requirements for setbacks that I think I understand in that particular property. So that's all I want to say about that particular item. I know the owners really do have a lot of comments they want to address, because it's obviously a neighborhood issue beyond just the architecture. I strongly differ with this Calabasas architecture attitude that I heard from somebody here, because that's not what it's intended to be. And I am an architect, and that person probably is not. And so I wanted to say that. And the sign was posted, and I changed it to reflect that there was a change of venue as directed by staff. But I don't believe there were notices that were sent out at the same time. So I just wanted to clarify that point. Again, I'm still here for any questions you may have regarding the potential design of this house and what they want to build. And I know they want to speak also.
Okay, that's fine. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Did you feel that anything productive came out with your talks with the Glendale Historical Society?
No, I mean, I think it's actually very much like meeting you guys at the site. I think we all understand why we're here, first of all. The timeline, and it's a very unfortunate thing because staff, yourselves, ourselves, the owners, we're all in a very difficult position. In terms of the conversation regarding the possibility of saving the home was there and redesigning something along those lines, we did take a look at that. I understand also that previous architect looked at that, and we differ in that opinion. And really, that's just how we ended up at this juncture. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, can I ask a question?
Yes.
I'm sorry, we're slow in the reaction time. I'm not. What is Calabasas architecture?
I'm not sure. I think you need to ask somebody else.
A big house.
What does that
Without
mean?
I'm guessing it means tract development, Spanish tract development of recent vintage, is my guess.
Contemporary Spanish colonial.
Kind of a neo-Spanish.
Okay.
It's not a recognized architectural style.
We won't be adding it to the styles list.
This is not.
We want to thank you all for listening to everybody's very passionate responses, and thank you everybody for coming out and showing your support and passion either one way or the other. But we, and I think I can speak for my husband, we're very confused about how we got here. We're very confused because in city government, there's a process and due process, and as the lady that was on the board for the development of the guidelines pointed out, it's been done a long time ago. This is not the first historical district to go into place. And it seems to be a very subjective process that isn't being followed consistently over and over. There's the Ross Moyne district, this district, that district, and it seems that the same process should have been followed with the Brockmont district that wasn't. There is no provision for pipeline projects as there is in other historic districts. And I really feel that we have been misdirected and that there is conflict between the different organizations that are being represented here tonight in terms of what the prevailing authority is. Whether it's CEQA, whether it's the state, whether it's the city of Glendale, whether our house is in fact a contributor, whether it's not a contributor. I have heard everybody with a different opinion tonight. And there's no unity coming from the city. In Mr. Dong's report, we're not of significant consequence. Other people feel very passionately that we are. You see, this house was built in 1954, which is significantly after some of the other homes. It's at the very tail end and cutoff of the requirements for this property, for this historical district. And it has to go back to how the district was set. Why Brockmont Street isn't even part of the district is baffling. Why one part of Valley View is and the other isn't. Why one side of the street is and isn't. We were a park at one time where our property sits. And there are the other two homes that sit on that island also have garages and access from the rear. So the plan isn't asking for anything that doesn't exist on this block, as well as the next portion of Valley View on the next block up that wasn't included in the historical. So while I personally appreciate the history of the homes, history is something that happens as time goes forward. So at the decision to include houses that stopped in 54 versus 53 versus 60 in a historical district, or one versus another, the house across the street from us was falling apart and was remodeled, but they're not part of the historical district. So we have really worked hard to make this house look as a contributor, and it's just very subjective how all of that plays in. I mean, at one point in time, other neighborhoods are going to be significant and historical as well. 100 years from now, they're going to look at homes built in this time frame as historically significant. So I just wanted to point that out. I also wanted to point out that we were never approached to vote on the historical district. I was never asked to vote. My husband and I were not approached at all during this by anybody. So this was going on around us, and that's okay. But during this effort of neighborhood support, I tried to find the time with 2 children to door knock every single house. And I went on several Saturdays and Sundays and evenings, and I got the support and contacted the people who were at home and available to speak to us. So we first found out about it when we received our paperwork in the mail with the city report, I guess, that showed the photo of our house and that the neighborhood was significant. And we attended the meeting where we spoke with you, that Mrs. Hinkle had referred to. And at that time, we had a long conversation about what we wanted to do.
This I remember.
I'm glad that you're able to dig back into your memory, because you had laughed at me about a 2-story ranch house at that time.
I would never laugh at you. I'd say it's not typical.
You did. Yeah. So we had asked about all different kinds of things, and Mr. Platt had said that there are no 2-story ranch houses that are traditional in quality, because we had a lot of concerns about what we wanted to do. So this process has been ongoing for a long time, and I think a lot of people feel like we tried to sneak in under the radar. We've been working on this for 3 years, and it's true. My husband bought the house 9 years ago, but we didn't inherit it like some other people did, where maybe it was bought for $30,000, $40,000 way back when, and people can tap into the equity to repair it and remodel it. We paid over $1 million for this house, and we've had to work to save the money to do this. So it's very difficult.
And just to clarify my time frame here, I've lived in Glendale for 35 years. I grew up in Glendale. I went to Hoover. I went to Toll. I've been here. I'm a resident, okay? I've been here a lot longer than some of you. And for them to say to move out, how dare you? I'm not going to move out. I love this city. And I'm going to fight for what is right. What's happening to us has been wrong. We're stressed out. We've been tossed around by Jay Platt When we speak to him, the first architect, he left saying, I can't help you. So we found Efren and said, please, can you do something so we can make this work? And here we are. And now we're throwing ourselves at your mercy because we want to build a house that's going to look beautiful and enhance the neighborhood. I've worked hard. My wife has worked hard to be in this neighborhood. We have every right. And I do not believe that we, that we could just, allow these things to happen without at least presenting our side and saying, hey, look, we are trying to work with you. We are trying to work with the city. We're trying to work with everybody here. But we just need you to work with us because it's just been one-sided. I've incurred all the cost. And again, we're incurring more cost for these drawings, for everything, for the time, for my architect, for my landscape designer. All this is costing me, but I'm still doing it. I'm not a millionaire. I am just a working guy trying really hard to put my life and my family life in a better place, and that's what I'm doing. I don't want to go to Calabasas, and I don't want to be pushed to Calabasas. So please, just help us. And again, I implore you. This is from the heart of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, with that, we'll close the public hearing. And as Commissioner Shire would usually preface our deliberations, I'll say that I think we all know, it's been said many times, that this is a very, very difficult case. And I don't think any of us here on the dais take it lightly. And whatever decision we end up taking, we hope that it will not be taken personally by the homeowners. I don't know what direction we're going. We'll find out in a few minutes, but I would also like to thank the owners and everyone else for your testimony. And Jay, just to clarify one thing for me, could you just talk about vested rights and how that works in Glendale, or how it might apply to this project, or
I'm
if that's
not sure what you mean.
in terms of what legal rights might be in a project like this when people have not actually broken ground or shown a significant amount of good faith work? And just at
Mr.
a
Chair,
high
members
level,
of
it might help
the
us.
Historic Preservation Commission. Thank you. Jillian Van Meiden, Chief Assistant City Attorney, City of Glendale, along with Yvette Nukian, who's one of our Assistant City Attorneys.
Please?
You can't hear me?
Or move your
Sorry
microphone
about that.
closer.
They seem to be kind of low. We're having a hard time hearing you as well for some reason. Apologize for that. Again, Jillian Van Meiden, Chief Assistant City Attorney, along with Yvette Nukian, who's an Assistant City Attorney in our office. We have been looking over the material and reviewing the CEQA as well as just the proposal. But to your question about vested rights, an application by itself does not establish vested rights for a project. They can come in actually three forms. One would be through a vesting tentative map. Two would be through a statutory development agreement. And three would be at the point in time that a building permit is validly issued and the applicant has spent a significant amount of the building valuation on investment in the development of the property. So until that building permit is issued, there isn't a vested right established. What does that mean? That means that if there are modifications in the code in the interim period after a development application has been accepted as complete, which is this situation, that project is susceptible to those changes. So let's look at this situation specifically where an historic district was established with particular regulations or an overlay that this property is now considered to be a contributor to that district. It is now subject to those regulations. So it is unfortunate that they did not have a vested right established for this particular applicant, but they didn't under the law. And they are subject to these regulations. Under CEQA, each discretionary review triggers CEQA and when you have a project. And so a project is something that's in the built environment that needs to be evaluated. A modification to a structure is that sort of modification. And if there is new information that arises after a development application is made and before the project approval, such as the establishment of an historic district, then that needs to be taken into consideration in the CEQA review, which is a public disclosure document. And it's based on substantial evidence, and the review of CEQA for purposes of establishing whether a property is or is not historic is substantial evidence, and it's a preponderance of the evidence, so more likely than not, whether or not it is in fact historic. So we have kind of two levels here, and I'm answering a little bit more than what you asked me, and I can continue if you would like, or I can wait for you to ask further questions. So I was going to provide a little bit more information on CEQA. If you want me to do that, I can continue. Is that the Commission's wish at this time?
Please.
Okay. So we look at the application to determine whether or not a significant impact has occurred. We're looking at the resource, whether there or not there is a resource. So the resource at issue here is the district itself. And so when we're looking at whether or not a particular property that has been designated as a contributor, the loss of that one individual property within the context of the district as a resource, would that create a significant impact to the overall district? So statistics and numbers are important. Obviously, in the same instance as being in the middle of Cannery Row as opposed to on the edge of Cannery Row, if the percentages, 60% of the properties need to be of contributors in order to maintain the district, and you're at that last property, then it is more significant than if you have 88% or 80% of the properties still contributing to the district. So it's a matter of magnitude. And in staff's opinion, it was not their opinion that the loss of this one property with this percentage available contributing to the district is significant. Another issue is whether or not the individual property is itself presumptively historic because it is a contributor to the district. There is nothing in CEQA that says that a contributor is presumptively itself an individual resource. It is simply a contributor to the district itself. The primary record of the Department of Parks and Recreation, they have classifications of property when they do a review. The review of this particular property based on that record was for purposes of determining whether or not it could contribute to the district. So it's looking at only two factors, not the multiple factors used for an individual resource. And that is it within the time period of the significance? And yes, it is. And does it retain integrity on some level of some of those character-defining features? Yes, it does, and that is why it was considered to be a contributor. But within that category of contributors, it was not determined to be also independently an historic resource, eligible or otherwise. It was just determined to be a contributor, period, end of story. So in looking at that and pressing this proposal through what the categories are for determining whether it would be an individual historic resource, it was the opinion of Mr. Platt, who is an in-house expert for purposes of historic preservation for city staff. It was his determination in looking at all of the evidence that the preponderance of the evidence weighed towards it not being a individual resource. So that's a summary of where staff landed and what you're seeing reflected in the staff report. From our review, we did not see anything legally problematic with respect to that analysis that was conducted by staff, both in looking at the resource district and whether or not the demolition of this property would create a significant impact on the district itself as a resource. And then we looked at whether or not the demolition of the property would be the demolition of a resource itself. And that is why the categorical exemption recommendation was made, in that typically small projects and an individual demolition of a single-family residence qualifies under a categorical exemption unless there's an exception to that. And that exception would be, of course, if it were an individual historic resource. Then that would be a significant impact. And that's where the opinions of some we've heard in the audience and the opinion of staff tends to diverge. But and looking at what staff prepared, that was the city attorney's analysis and review. We did support their conclusion from a legal perspective. So if you have further questions, we're certainly available to elaborate further.
Thank you. Okay, who would like to go first?
It's very confusing. I don't like the fact that we're here. That I think this should have been taken care of before it came to us, to tell you the truth. I mean, I see just her thing. It's staff says it's not a resource. The Glendale Historical Society says it is a resource. So how do you decide?
Well, let's clarify. It's a contributing structure. It may not be an independent resource on its own for the Historic Register. So it is a resource of some type, but it's a contributing only.
Right.
So,
Well, I mean, do we want to start with questions, or do you want to? Are there things that still need to be clarified?
I'll start. Somebody has to. Well, you know, I'm sorry you're going to have to listen to me for a while because there's a lot, you know. So, please be patient.
Come to microphone.
Speak up, please.
Yeah.
Oh, guilty. So there's no right answer, unfortunately. That's the situation we find ourselves in. You can make arguments on both sides, and although the staff report is very comprehensive and good, I think that a lot of the issues in the staff report are conflated. I mean, you know, there's like a lot of syllogisms there. If this is this, therefore this is this, so therefore this is this. It's very confusing as an issue. Obviously, legally, there's one interpretation here that sounds very compelling, and then there is another interpretation that sounds very compelling. I noticed that in attachment 7, page 2, I think the city refers to the survey that was done when the district was being evaluated as a reconnaissance level survey.
which is true.
Which is true, which would mean that the survey isn't binding or may be sort of vague in its determination, which is not the way I previously had interpreted the surveys that are being done to establish whether or not something is a contributor or not. But if that's the case, then it seems to me that CEQA in TGHS's interpretation applies here because, like Glendale does with many properties, commercial or otherwise, we see it all the time. Somebody wants to develop something downtown and it triggers an EIR. That we have a similar situation here, which is not a very good situation. I mean, I share some concern with other people about triggering an EIR every time somebody proposes to do something in a historic district. But that's my interpretation if this is reconnaissance level surveying of where we're at. We need an impact report.
Could I clarify the survey?
Go ahead.
There are two types of historic resource surveys. There's a reconnaissance survey, which is sometimes called a windshield survey, and there's a comprehensive survey, which is a more in-depth survey. All of our historic district surveys in Glendale have been the former, the windshield survey. And the windshield survey specifically is designed to determine what property is a contributor and what property is a non-contributor. It is completely binding, and those determinations are determined by professional consultants who do these surveys. The reason we don't do a more comprehensive survey for historic districts is because that requires in-depth research into every property, including permit records, ownership records, research into the potential significance of people associated with the properties, events associated with the properties. And in general, in the preservation profession, the reconnaissance survey is the standard survey for historic districts.
Well, that's interesting because, when I read the San Fernando Development Corridor Reconnaissance Survey, 3901 was a potentially historic landmark at greater than the local level, and then it seems like binding is being used as a term of art here because we see the changes in these surveys being done all the time. So
not at all. That may have just been a different type of survey, but a reconnaissance survey is officially recognized as a binding survey for historic districts.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. I think somebody, maybe it was the gentleman in the front, made the comment about, you're moving into a neighborhood and then boom, historic district happens. Well, that's true. It can happen. I mean, anybody can move into a non-designated area and then it can become a designated area. But there is a very comprehensive process that takes place. And remember that this is the whole historic district movement is a grassroots process. There are some cities where the city can designate a district or designate landmarks, but in Glendale, the process is a very labor-intensive, procedure-laden, grassroots process that the neighborhood does. And like every kind of democratic situation, you have majority rule, and then whatever happens, the majority will prevail in that situation. So it really is important that people are working together, and it's interesting that I didn't look back at I would have to look back again at all the letters came in, but there are very few people expressing an opinion from the Brockmont Historic District here, as far as I can tell. People on Brockmont Drive, but that's not part of the district. So it's interesting that, it's supposed to be a grassroots process that goes on in perpetuity. I don't see too much evidence of grassroots participation. In talking with the owner and the architect, it sounded like you did want to change the style of the house right from the beginning, which would not be necessarily appropriate for a historic district and the handling of contributing structures. That's the way it works in a district. The style prevails, the architectural style of the house. However, on the other hand, we've heard some evidence, if I heard you correctly, correct me if I'm wrong, that it's impossible to remodel the house in the style of a ranch, and that there are going to be so many issues that the owner would come up against, that basically what we're saying here is that they can't work with the house as it exists today.
And so staff does not believe that's necessarily the case. They could remodel the house working with the existing style, possibly achieving many, if not all, of their current goals.
Okay. Then I stand corrected. I want to say something about the logic of, the whole thing about the sort of eroding down to 60%. I think that every district, 60% may be the requirement across the board, but when a district is designated, the percentage that's established as the percentage of contributors defines the district. Whether we do it consciously or unconsciously, we're not moving toward 60% as kind of our fail-safe. Brockmont is at, 88%. That's what defines Brockmont Historic District's historic fabric. So, that whole that whole thing about the, whether it's in total or singular fashion, that, you're making an exception, that is a spurious argument that I think has been used in Glendale for a long time in different situations to chip away at the historic fabric of the city, where you end up with a bunch of last remainings, and we don't necessarily even count those anymore. So, what kind of precedent are we setting here? Maybe not a legal precedent, but we're probably setting a bad precedent. What of the other 10 contributing ranches? This one is a high, high, medium, and low. This one gets rated as high, so what could or would happen to the others? I get the feeling that the ranch style of house is not considered to be a style in some respects, and in fact it is. So
Yeah, we accept that.
we accept it, yeah. So, it's not so much that the structure that's being proposed isn't good. I heard things in the letters I thought were frankly kind of insulting. Somebody called it a Brobdingnagian house. I mean, yeah, it is a little bit bigger than the largest house in the area, but FAR-wise, the house falls within the current range. This thing about Calabasas, whatever the heck that means. I just think people build contemporary style neo-Spanish revival houses all the time. So that's not an argument to me either. And it just goes on, and I really don't like to talk for a long period of time. So since I'm only halfway through my comments, I would like to stop now and let somebody else say something, unless that's totally inappropriate and illegal.
At the chair's discretion, and it happens all the time.
Can you give me a break here?
Fine.
Thank you, because I'm not done, but these people are all waiting to say what they want to say.
Yep.
So let them.
I'll speak. Well, first of all, I wanted to say thank you to all of you for sharing your opinions today on both sides. That's what makes the city, and that's what makes us all a community, very differing opinions. And so I appreciate your willingness and boldness to speak out on whatever position you had. I also want to thank the owners for your diligent effort and spending resources. Obviously, you've been on this journey a long time. And for your new architect and for the great job he did with your challenging site and setbacks and all the requirements while trying to meet your request for a Spanish-style home. I appreciate the timeline, too, by both staff and the architect. It's very helpful for me, and that's kind of one thing that I needed to weigh into my decision today was how did this come forward? Why did we end up here? And I wanted to kind of understand that better to weigh that into my decision. Either way you look at it, it's an unfortunate situation that the ordinance didn't already accommodate for pipeline projects, giving us guidelines to adhere to, giving the public more clear direction. It's unfortunate that the homeowners are potentially in a situation where they thought they were going to one deadline and now it's been changed. So I feel for you. It's been very helpful to me. I appreciate, City Attorney, your view. I appreciate you sharing the legal aspect and providing clarity on the owner's rights or lack of rights in this situation since there was no application approval granted. For me, being on this Historic Preservation Commission and a passion for historic preservation, had we not had all these timeline issues, the decision would have been very easy for me. We wouldn't be demolishing contributing structures in a historic district. So that's what really presents a challenge. It's very easy if it just historic district's in place and a property came to me requesting demolition. That would not be something I would support. Because of this different situation, it's tough. It's a tough decision. And I think we're all struggling with what's the right thing to do in this aspect. However, hearing the city attorney's indication and providing clarity, although unfortunate and hard for me to make this decision today, because the city can kind of change the rules or evoke certain things, at what point it's valuable to them and valuable now to protect a historic district. I think at this point I would support the renovation or addition of this home in a style that would support the current historic district, but I don't feel I could support demolition of the contributing property and feel like we're doing our job here today. So that's been a tough decision to get to, and I want to make sure you know that it comes with a lot of thought and a lot of evaluating of both sides, trying to be very, very neutral. But that's where I'm leaning at the moment.
Thank you. Commissioner Morgan?
Well, I kind of concur with Commissioner Shire. Historic preservation is not simply about buildings that we save from the wrecking ball. It's also about what kind of buildings we build, which become our historic inventory for the future, which has been mentioned. Therefore, the decision about the future of Valley View is not simply about whether it's appropriate to tear down a contributing house and a historic overlay zone. It is also about what we plan to replace that house with and what this decision means in terms of the precedent for the future. The benchmark as to what some believe to be historic these days has become somewhat unpredictable. Do we preserve a house in Brockmont because a historical group says so? What about a stone cottage in Crescenta Valley or historic sanitarium such as Rock Haven? Historic advocacy can seem arbitrary at times. Do we allow the demolition of a contributing home in a historic district simply because it's allowable under the law to do so and can be rationalized somehow if a commission tacks on enough conditions and changes to the design so that we can put the applicant through its paces? I feel that Valley View represents an opportunity to set a standard. In my mind, that standard should be if I am to vote to allow the destruction of a contributing home in a historic district, then the design for the project that is going to replace that home should be of high merit and architectural excellence. I've kind of changed my mind on that. I feel it's a lot better than when I originally looked at it. While it's arguably true that the existing home on Valley View is not exceptional, it is also true that design for its replacement does nothing to add to the integrity of our city's future historic inventory, and changing the shape of chimneys and removing a roof deck will not change this fact in my mind. The findings are there to come down on either side. Since the Commission is placed in the position of acting as a DRB on this matter, then design becomes foremost, and in this case is not, unfortunately, a worthy replacement for housing inventory in a residential historic district. 30.25.060 states, the Historic Preservation Commission, in considering an application for demolition of a building, shall be guided by balancing the contribution of the particular structure to the character of the district against the special merit of the proposed replacement project. There is nothing so compelling about this design to warrant destruction of a contributing structure. Therefore, based on this particular project, not simply because the existing home is a contributing property, this development should be denied. I say that sadly because I really feel for the applicants themselves. And I think they've worked really hard, and I realize they're not millionaires, and they've kind of been put through this process that I think should have been cleared long before it ever came to the HPC. And I hope that the city can work something out with them that will be beneficial to all of them. If historic preservation is to mean anything in all Glendale, then our standards should be high, and the development community needs to understand that their design should be inspired, which it kind of is, when asking to remove a contributing property in a historic district. That's my answer.
I'll wrap it up. I do not necessarily believe that a legal precedent is being set one way or the other here. That really isn't the point. I think we had a climate in the city that we have lived with for a long time, and that the historic district was formed as a grassroots movement. I think it really needs to be taken a very serious look at this point. We're at a crossroads here. We now have 6 districts. People are moving in and out. Changes are being made. And I would like to propose that we put a moratorium on the formation of any more historic districts until we have a look at our ordinance and make sure that it's iron-proof with respect to what it is we're doing here. Because despite the fact that the people out in the audience may not believe this, these situations will occur in other places. People move in and out. There aren't any districts or houses that are impervious to this situation. It's going to happen, and it can happen. You know, everybody says, I'm okay, my house is good, I'm taking care of things, but we have a process here, and we need to make sure it worked. In this case, it clearly did not, and we are in a really, really lousy situation here, probably not as bad as the homeowners are. I feel the same way that my colleagues feel. I think that we have to uphold the principles upon which Historic District was formed, and I think that CEQA in this case should not mandate that an EIR be formed, but I think I see this particular property as potentially a resource within the Historic District. It certainly is a contributor that has been designated at a high level, and I would have to agree with my colleagues that we need to uphold the Historic District guidelines and ordinances as they exist and move forward from here. I'm hearing the city say that there's a workable solution, and this concerns me because I've heard throughout the evening that there is not a solution and that the owners ran up against a brick wall when they tried to formulate a solution, and then I've heard there is a solution, so I'm really not sure, but I would implore the city to work with the owners to come up with a reasonable solution and for the community to fill some of the holes that we have in our Historic District ordinance and guidelines.
I agree with
Done?
I'm done.
Okay. And I would support that last request you just made. And again, I'm not going to say much that's different. I do agree with my colleagues. I recognize, we all recognize that there were two parallel processes in place here. It's very apparent we don't have anything in place right now to deal with this situation. It's very unfortunate. I'm familiar with Mr. Olivares' work. He is an architect of high integrity. I think the product he puts out is always of the highest quality. The drawings I'm looking at and the rendering are something which, by my personal taste, I may prefer to what's there, but I don't feel comfortable putting what might be my personal preference before what I feel is my obligation to the Historic District and to this process. You know, I reviewed the survey of the neighborhood. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the two homes across from this property are non-contributors because they have already gone through significant changes. Someone pointed out a home up, I think, on Kempton that recently got torn down and replaced. It is, as has been said, it's the sum of the parts that make the whole. And so I find it important for us to retain our contributing structures in our districts. And I'm, as my colleagues are struggling with this, I'm not happy either that I make this decision today because I know you've been through a lot. Please know that whatever direction we take, you have an opportunity to appeal to the City Council. And with that, if someone would like to make a motion.
I'll move to deny the demolition of 1555 Valley View Road.
Do I have a second? May we have roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Shire?
Yes.
Commissioner Vidor?
Yes.
Commissioner Morgan?
Reluctantly, yes.
Madam Chair Vartanian?
And regrettably, yes.
Thank you. Motion denies.
Thank you all for coming out today.
We've still got.
Started moving.
But you are welcome to leave if you'd like.
Julia. I would go for it.
Okay. We have one more, at least one more item, which is number 8, Planning Division updates and informational briefings. 8A, update on recently issued RFQs.
It's a little anticlimactic here.
It is, Jay.
but I'll be very, very brief.
To be honest.
This is an update to let the Commission know that on 3 different projects we've issued documents requesting proposals from consultants for work related to historic preservation efforts. The first is the request for qualifications that was issued to the broadest possible range of applicants to look at possible development opportunities at the Rockhaven site in Montrose. And the proposals have been received. The city is currently reviewing them. The process is we are working closely with the Historical Society of the Crescenta Valley, Glendale Historical Society, and other stakeholders in the North Glendale area. And at this point, everyone is excited about the possibility of finding a use for the site that will generate income that can also be used to restore the historic buildings on site and to also bring them back to life. So I'll keep you posted as this moves forward. Once we select, assuming we select any of the proposals that were submitted in the request for qualifications, we're going to move into an RFP process, which is much more intensive. The RFQ is basically looking for visions for the site. What do you think we can do here? The RFP is going to ask for very specific proposals down to how are you going to finance this? What are you going to do? The good news is all the proposals that we've seen are taking great care with the historic nature of the site and respect for that. I should mention that Commissioner Morgan is part of the team discussing this. And so we have HPC representation in the group.
May I ask how many we've received?
We received 10 propososes.
That's, I think, a lot more than...
Moving on, then we've also recently issued, this is more of an update from when I originally scheduled this, we issued a request for proposals for the South Glendale Historic Context, which is an important part of the South Glendale Community Plan, which we're in the middle at staff, with staff preparing a community plan. The context kind of establishes a certain baseline. It's very similar to the North Glendale Community Context or Historic Context that you reviewed a couple of years ago for the North Glendale area. We prepared that one in-house. This one we realized was going to be much more complicated, and also we don't have as much staff time as we had at that point. So we've retained Historic Resources Group to conduct this context, and we're excited to be working with them. And in other news, we have issued another RFP for the Neodraro Drive Historic District. We are not looking at a moratorium on historic districts, but we are going to move as fast as we can to kind of
better make that deadline.
To definitely work on the ordinance revision. For the Neodraro Drive district, we've retained Architectural Resources Group, who's going to be conducting that. We're still in the process of finalizing the contract and getting the money issues settled there, but that should be moving forward in the near future. So those are our recent RFPs and RFQs. And that's all we have.
Okay.
I move to adjourn the meeting.
Thank you. And I just want to quickly thank staff for always your wisdom and support that you always provide us while we're up here making difficult decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. Adjourn at 8 o'clock. Thank you.